Next up is a good friend. We were joking last night. Everybody knows him. He also has initials, and his initials are PK. And he is also an angel investor. He calls himself Maker-in-Chief. I'm curious what that is. He's going to have a conversation on the startup world. You know, there are big unicorns being created, but at the other end of the spectrum, there are lean startups and small companies emerging and being successful. And he's going to have a nice chat and dialogue with another old friend who I haven't seen in a long time, Vivek Mehra. Vivek is with August Capital, very well-known and eminent firm in Silicon Valley. So we're going to see this conversation between someone from Dubai who also comes to Silicon Valley in India, and Vivek, who's primarily, you know, resident in Silicon Valley, talking about startups. So let's have both of you come up.
Good morning.
Morning.
So we've been given a topic which seems to be on the top of everybody's agenda, you know, how things are funded and how companies are built. But before we get started, you know, I have the pleasure of having a dear friend who I've known for many years, somebody who is really August company in Silicon Valley, Vivek Mehra, the partner emeritus of August Capital. So Vivek has been an entrepreneur who turned into a VC pretty early. You know, you were an entrepreneur in the first wave of the web, of the internet, and then you ended up, you know, becoming a pretty well-known VC. So why don't you tell us a bit or a snapshot of your story, and so that people can actually, you know, understand what you did, and then we'll get into the topic.
Sure. So I grew up in India. I ended up doing engineering here and then went to the States. I spent the first half of my career in engineering doing development. I actually loved it. I ended up working at 3 large companies, last company being Apple, and then left to start my own company called Cobalt Networks, which was in the internet space. We were building these specialized internet servers. Fortunately, the company did pretty well. We ended up taking it public. We're public for a year when Sun Microsystems bought us. So it was a pretty good acquisitions. I led the business unit at Sun for a year, for almost 2 years, and then left and joined August Capital, which was the largest investor in my company. So then I've been in August for 15 years. So I've spent about 15 years of my career as an operator and 15 years as a venture capitalist investing in technology startups, primarily in the US. So, you know, the perspective that you'll hear from me hopefully will be a balanced perspective, sharing my perspectives and experiences both as an operator as a VC. And as a VC, I've now spent, as I said, 15 years and invested in about 20 companies. Quite a few of them have done quite well. Some of them have not done well, as you would have expected. You know, the failure rates in startups is pretty intense. There's very high competition. But I would say, I think I'm super excited about the time that we have today. I think we are at an incredibly interesting time, and hopefully we'll delve deeper into those as we go through this conversation.
So how many of the audience are startup founders, active startup founders at this point of time?
Oh, that's good. I'd say about 30%.
30%. How many of you are wannabe startup founders?
I was hoping that there'd be more hands that show up.
And how many of you have been startup founders, been there, done that, don't want to do it again? None. Just point to note. So Vivek, tell us about how things have changed. You started in Web 1.0,
right,
the first internet space, and then went on to, you know, and especially in the hardware space,
right,
which seems to have completely changed. The paradigm seems to have completely changed. I don't see servers anymore in people's offices. So how has things changed, like in the sense over the 15 years that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. I think, look, you know, the big change has been the whole democratization of technology. We'll start with that, and then we'll come back to some of the other stuff. The huge changes, of course, the internet has been the biggest change of it all. And, you know, when I started my career almost 30 years ago, that was just starting off. And the internet, as we all know, has been the biggest leveler of it all, because it has made access to technology, access to knowledge phenomenally well for everyone. That has been great. The second thing has been the rise of open source, which a lot of people here are young enough not to really realize the impact that that has had. When initially 30 years ago, when that was not, people had to really pay for software. And people may say, really, right? That has been phenomenal. The third thing that has been very good, and that is a much more recent phenomenon, which ties directly to your question, which has been hardware. When people had to start companies earlier, they'd have to pay for a lot of hardware. You needed money to start a company.
You had to build a data center.
You had to build a data center. You'd need tens of thousands of dollars and lakhs of rupees to buy hardware. You don't have to do that anymore. You just have to have a laptop and have an access on Amazon account. That has been an incredible change. That has made much easier for people to start companies. So all you need is now a credit card, access to internet, and a laptop. You can open up a company, which has been incredible for innovation, right? So that has been a huge thing. And the final thing, which I think now is kind of obvious, which didn't exist a number of years ago, is the access to mobile phones.
Mm-hmm. So the distribution.
Distribution. So you start with the fact that you have access to software, access to cloud, access to distribution. It is an incredible game changer. Mm-hmm. To me, that is one of the most, I mean, when you take any one of these, it's significant. But when you add all of these things together, that is an incredible game changer. Mm-hmm. And that is changing the way people are thinking about startups and thinking about, creating products. To me, that is why I am super excited about it. And you don't need millions of dollars to start companies. You can, and anyone can start companies anywhere in the world. It is no longer Silicon Valley. You can start companies in Europe, you can start companies in India, you can start companies in Africa, and we are seeing innovation like that. That to me is incredible, which is why I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to see companies start everywhere in the world.
Yeah, Skype from Estonia.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I mean, we've seen Skype, which one of our partners at August had initially invested in. We've seen companies like, Skype is one of the largest companies. We were talking about Zendesk. Zendesk was a company started in Copenhagen that was very successful. Our firm recently invested in a company that we debated a lot about. It has 300 employees, does not even have a headquarter. And we debated how can we invest in a company. It's a company called GitLab. Okay. They do software for helping companies manage their software compilations and distribution. And it was started in Europe someplace and not a single office. And the interesting story was they held their first ever conference where they got everyone to meet at one location, and they had their event.
Nobody knew anybody kind of thing.
They never had, most people had never met face to face, and they held their event in a resort in the Caribbean someplace, and they all got together, and they really didn't know how to interact properly, so they all kind of met for an hour, and they went back to their hotel rooms and started talking to each other on video conference, which was hilarious, right? You come to a resort and they really don't know how to physically interact with each other. So it's these kinds of things which I think are, it's changing the way people code, it's changing the way people interact with each other. But it will also lead to some interesting ways companies are built.
Yeah, so we just heard before Girish Matrabhum, a company called Freshworks, or started as Freshdesk, something which started out of Chennai, and it's a global company.
Correct.
And still stays in Chennai.
Correct.
As a company. So those are great examples.
Yeah.
But there's also this flip side to it, which is the topic today. It almost feels that if you are not a billion-dollar company, and if you don't have these $100 million rounds, you're not successful.
Yeah, yeah. I think that everyone wants to be a unicorn. But people forget unicorn are mythical devices, mythical animals. They don't exist, right?
And if you had too many of them, then they won't be mythical anymore.
No, but they'll still remain mythical.
Yes, sir.
They'll still, so it's a strange phenomena. It's a very recent phenomena. I think there, in some ways, it's a negative impact on the startup ecosystem because everyone wants to strive for this billion-dollar valuation, but people don't realize that these intermediate valuations are just points in time. The only valuation that frankly really matters is the exit valuation. These intermediate valuations are just temporary points in time things. So you really have to question why people are aiming for those things, and why are these massive rounds happening? Frankly, I question those. I question those. When a company raises a very large round of financing, no matter how good an entrepreneur you are, you will waste money. No matter how good you are, and I've seen that. We've had companies in my portfolio. I've had companies in my portfolio that have raised a large round. I've seen the entrepreneurs waste money. It doesn't mean that they will waste all the money. They will waste a large chunk of money. And on the flip side, I've seen companies, and I'm being very frank here, so I don't mean it in disrespect to any entrepreneur. I've seen companies run most efficiently when they are 6 months or a year away from running out of money. It's a natural tendency. I'm sure you've seen that. And we do that in our personal lives too. We run up our things most efficiently when we are 6 months, a year out of running out of money. It's just, that's how, human nature. That's how we operate. So you have to question, and we have to dig deeper into what's happening. Why are these companies raising large chunks of money? So you have to dig deeper and say, when I thought about it, it splits into two things. Companies that have well-established businesses and the business model is working deserve to raise large amounts of money.
For scaling.
They can, for scale.
For scaling.
So it makes perfect sense for them. But there's a subset of companies. It's not large number of companies. But then there are other companies that have a lot of hype associated with it. And I question why investors are putting large chunks of money into them. I really question that. And then you say, well, why is it happening? And I think when you dig deeper into it, it is because, frankly, interest rates are low, and big funds are being raised because LPs don't really have interesting ways to invest money. They give them to large funds. Mega funds are being raised. When mega funds are being raised, then what happens? They don't have opportunities to put money in. There's pressure for them to invest money. They basically end up putting money into companies, and that's how large raises are happening. And I think time will tell whether these things are happening. In most cases, it's generally not a good idea.
So these mega raises, when they happen, they skew the marketplace. But what's the message for the majority of them? So majority of them don't get these kind of raises, correct? But we do see a larger amount of money being available in the ecosystem at this point of time. Be it Silicon Valley, look at India, look at other ecosystems, you see the money availability is actually larger than what it was. It may not be enough at every level, but it's there. And that has given rise to a possibility, in this audience, for example, an ambitious set of people who are trying to build the next generation of companies. And these companies need not be unicorns. These companies could be $50, $100 million companies, which are robust companies, which will employ a very large number of people or create solutions to large problems. So what is the message you have for those guys?
I think that, look, the message will always be solve a real problem. If you're solving a real problem and the problem is large enough to build a sustainable company, focus on that. I don't think people should get defocused by these large raises. If you focus on a big problem and it's a defensible problem, solve that, and good things will happen. If you get carried away and have, large valuation envy, it will not work out well for you. I think if it's a big problem, solve it, and work on a defensible problem, good things will happen to the company. That should be the thing. That's what a good entrepreneur should do.
So also the other question which has now kind of become, like everybody wants to go to the valley.
Yeah.
Like they want to go to you and ask for, setting up there. Is that the only way out, or is
Certainly
that the
not.
way to do that?
No, there is certainly not. I think, the valley is a phenomenal place, don't get me wrong. I think there is great things happening, but there's wonderful things happening here. There's wonderful things happening in other parts of the world. You have to be where, I think the sales organization should be where a bulk of the customers are. You have to figure out where the right place to develop, where the right place to sell, and where the right talent is. Go where the talent is and go where the customers are. If the customers are in India, be where there. If the customers are in Europe, go where that is. You don't have to don't chase the trends. And the other thing I would really caution is don't chase what you're reading in the press. The press is very backward looking. I mean, what you read in the press is what has already happened, right? So do your independent research and go look for what is going to happen. That's what an entrepreneur is expected to do. The trends that get reported in the press is what has happened a year and a half ago. A good entrepreneur that has developed something and has become successful is stuff that has already happened like 2 to 3 years ago. So if you start chasing what is happening by reading in the press, you're working on stuff that got developed 2 to 3 years ago.
So you see a list of what are the top 5 trends, you're already too late.
It's already done. That stuff is done. If you're working on big data or IoT or ML-oriented stuff, in some ways, it is almost too late. Mm-hmm. So you have to do an independent research and look at solving problems that you are going to find.
So let me ask you the difficult question then. Like, how do people find out what the latest trends are? Like from you, somebody like you. So if the trends that the press is going to publish are going to be late, so most of the people will actually look at late trends. How do they find the early trends?
You have to do that by two things you have to do. One is really go talk to customers. Mm-hmm. And forward-looking customers. You have to talk to CTOs of companies that are buying stuff. Talk to them and say, what are the problems that you are facing that you don't have solutions for? That is one. And then you have to do your own independent research of what you think the problems are going to be, not by reading stuff in the press. And then you have to hope and pray that you get it right.
So right? Tell us a few trends that you see.
So if I knew, I'd be starting a company. No, I'm not being glib. But look, I think the stuff that you are reading in the press around AI, ML is very real. These things are solving complex problems. But again, this is all, there's too many companies in that has already started. But application of these in some real world problems are very interesting things to look at.
Well, I'm scared. Like, I see either AI is coming to take my job or AI is coming to take my life if I believe Elon
I don't
Musk.
think any of that stuff is, I mean, look, people have been talking about robotics taking over our lives. Yes, but they are making our lives easier. And that will continue. It will make our lives easier. But you have to go find real applications for those. But it's the same algorithms are being used. Everyone's using the 5 or 6 algorithms, right? But it's not about those algorithms, it's how do you use those to solve specific problems? And are those markets big enough? And do you have something unique? Does your team have something unique that can make it defensible? Mm-hmm. And by the way, don't be afraid of getting it wrong initially. Most companies that start with an idea, and those ideas change. So you may start with an idea, and then that idea may change. When we started our company, it was the 3rd idea that we got right. Mm-hmm. So our investors funded us. First idea changed in 3 months. Second idea changed. 3rd idea we got right. Mm-hmm. But we were smart enough, I think, that we changed those ideas in 6 months. We weren't, stuck on those ideas for 2 years. We quickly changed, and the third idea was the sixth month, and then we just went straight.
So one of the things which looking at the Valley and outside, both of them, I feel is that the, failure in the Valley is seen as a success matrix. Like you have actually gone through there, failed, and tried it all over again.
Yeah.
It's seen as experience. Do you see the other parts of the world actually have fear of failure, which is far higher than it should be? People are afraid to fail?
Yeah, I think in the Valley there is a little bit that if you fail fast, it's fine. But in the Valley also, if you take a long time to fail, it's not viewed that well.
Quick suicide, not
quick. Yes, I think in the Valley, if you take too long to fail, people don't view that well. I think, particularly in India, I think it's just a cultural thing.
I think India, who all have failed? Can you put your hands up? You won't see a hand up.
That's good.
I tried to do a conference called FailCon. I couldn't find people to come and speak.
Hey,
I wanted to talk about the success. Nobody wanted to talk about the failure.
No, I think it's just a cultural. My father wasn't very thrilled when I left Apple to do my own company. He was like, "Really, you want to do that?" But that's fine. I think things have changed. These things.
You got free Macintoshes. Why would you?
That is very true. Free job. That's very true. So things have changed, and it's a far better time right now to do stuff for all the sets of reasons. Hopefully you guys agree with what I had mentioned. It's a fascinating time. I'm super thrilled about all of the stuff that's happening right now.
So on that positive note, would you have a question for Vivek? Vivek? So Vivek, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for speaking to us. There is? I didn't see, sorry. There is a question there. Identify yourself and ask the question.
My name is Shravan and I'm from Abda Digital. The question that I have is related to what you just said, that you have to iterate fast. There's something also known as perseverance. So when do you know that an idea is working or you should persevere forward? Are there any guidelines, key indicators?
It's a fabulous question. I don't have a good answer for that. There has to be, an entrepreneur has to be stubborn enough, but has to, at some stage, realize when to give up. No, I don't think giving up is the right word, but has to realize when to change course. I think you have to have a set of people around you that you trust that can give you feedback as to when it's time to do a course correction. I don't think it should be called giving up. It should be calling a course correction.
Good. Any other question? So MR is telling me to kind of wind up. Thank you very much, Vivek.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great session. You bet.